Finance Committee. Order is 6:35 p.m. Please, we have a roll call, please.
Mr. Arbogast,
Here.
Mr. Brisbane, Mr. Kowski,
Here.
Mr. Davis,
Here.
Dr. Fiorenza, here, Ms. Guerrero, Mr. Einhoff,
Here.
Dr. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Kohler, Mr. Miller,
Here.
Dr. Odell. Here.
The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for our last meeting on August 16th. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review those. Does anyone have any questions or changes to the minutes? Could I have a motion to approve that? Motion. Second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We have no one from the public here. Lisa, do you have anyone on Zoom wishing to talk to the committee?
No public comments.
Okay. So our first discussion item is the district goals. We talked about this at the August meeting, that the board would be discussing their goals. I believe in September, and Rena volunteered to share that with us. That he's on vacation this week, so hopefully Tom can share with us what the board talked about for their goals and how they may intersect with CFC. Good.
At least I have a draft. So the board has had kind of some extensive conversation and is still finalizing the wording on the goals, but we have 6 or 7 different goal areas. I'm gonna focus on those pertinent to this group. There's goals tied to student achievement and culture climate, but there is a finance goal and there is a facilities goal. Let me see.
I have them here.
Oh, thank you. Can
You want me
you?
to start reading?
Yes.
I
I don't have mine.
think, Tom, it might make sense, but correct me on this, if we focus on shooting finance goals first, and there's also facilities goals that might have intersection.
Yeah, I just want to kind of read, because there is specific reference to how things will be passed off to CFC, or expectations.
You know what, actually, I realized what I had in front of us. It's not the entire set. It is, I was doing a crosswalk myself. The main goal for finance for the board is will effectively manage equitable financial decision making. And it highlights a few different things. It says by 5/24, launch successful and relevant district financial dashboard. By 3/24, and these dates could still be adjusted. By 3/24, CFC is to determine what is on this dashboard. Who do we compare to district? We've had that conversation before, but revisiting that. And finally, what does it look like itself? What is the dashboard visualization?
Is that last piece also a CFC?
What
does it look like?
That's what it is listed in the template right now, yes. The next one.
Just with the expectation that that will be part of a bigger board dashboard that will include non-financial pieces, but that's just the financial piece.
The next one is clear funding plan is developed for remaining and managing facilities projects and long-term maintenance. And then specifically, the time-bound definitions there are by May 25. I'm sorry, by May 24 of the end of this school year. CFC is to identify who will be involved in developing funding for future facilities plans and what will the process be. What is the process to be followed? And then the final board objective within the overall finance goal is it says sustain D200's equitable resource distribution using evidence-based funding model. And the time-bound element there says by 1/24, the administration is to document the process of how the EDF model is used for resource decisions in compliance with Board Policy 712, which is our racial equity policy. So That one looks like we could perhaps bring it to CFC, Tom, I don't know the intent of it, we could bring it to CFC, that largely is admin work, and not CFC work. And that's it as far as the finance goes. Any question on those, or should I'll pause it before I go back into the facilities ones.
What was the overarching goal before the dashboard?
Yeah, they were these kind of like these, they were high level goals, like if we're successful, bing, you know, what is the main message?
Yeah.
And it is D200 effectively manages equitable financial decision making.
Oh, that's the whole
That's the thing. Does that help?
equitable financial decision.
Yeah, the idea is that you know, we put resources where they are most needed.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Facilities. All right, facilities. D200 effectively manages student focused, needs based, and equity driven facilities expansion and overall maintenance program. So that's student focused, needs based, equitable facilities. And we're talking about expansion and overall maintenance program. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 goals linked to this one. But I don't know if any of these directly go to CFC, Tom. So facilities dashboard including, so there's a separate facilities dashboard, project timeline and finances by area, focusing on, you know, what the overall spend is, has been, what has been committed, and what's expected in the future, launched by 1/24. And that's the first one. The second objective underneath this goal is track and field projects completed on time and on budget. By 11/23. I'm paraphrasing on this, but the third one is project 2 delivered on time and on budget without injury by 6/26. And there's also reference to quarterly reviews beginning March 24 through 6/26. And so maybe the CSC could have some input on what those look like potentially. And the final objective is sustainability plan is finalized and successfully incorporated into the project 2 construction schedule. And then there are timelines for hiring a third party and funding that specific type of work. And all of that is the school. Is that, Tom, is there anything you want me to add there?
I think you can. I'll say the title of number 4.
D200 effectively manages, and these are the three lists after this are the 3 that were pulled out of the Imagine process.
Okay.
Okay, so D200 effectively, sorry, I highlighted it, I can't do it. D200 effectively manages student-focused, needs-based, and equitable facilities expansion and maintenance program.
Yeah, number 4 was the 4th one, right?
Yeah.
This sustainability.
The sustainability. Yeah, can you,
Is important objective.
can you repeat that one?
Sustainability plan finalized and successfully incorporated into project 2 construction schedule. And there are 2 specific time-bound elements. By 10/23, hire third-party expert. And that date shifts a little bit. And by February 24, develop overall plan and identify who needs to be part of project 2 and fund project 2 sustainability components. Good.
Yeah, I was still writing.
So to come to, you know, as I said, these are in the final stretch, they've been kind of mapped out. Right now, they're being put into a template that outlines a little more specificity of what the deliverables are. Who really should be doing the deliverable, whether it's board work, whether it's committee work, whether it's administration, and what the role of the board is. Is the board monitoring something? Is the board building something or creating policy, etc. So we have a template, and that is expected to be done by this Thursday, that they will have them so that we will review them as a board and accept them at the end of the our next board meeting, which is a week from Thursday, I believe. With the recognition that there's still reviewing of timing, as Greg said. And then I will say, out of all of those, just to be transparent, the one on projects 3, 4, 5 is kind of the more far-fetched. You know, I mean, we have it on our radar. What we're going to get done this year is a real question. I mean, it's on the radar that it needs to be done. Done meaning, how are we going to make decisions moving forward? But we know that we're still trying to fight at project 2 and finish other things. So that one,
Yeah.
I think it's a space holder at least, right?
I'm a little curious on how you see the dashboard conversation going, since that's the more imminent one for CFC. That sort of feels a little bit more like a project than a meeting topic. And just wondering maybe if that's a subcommittee sort of thing, or if we just maybe we would want to talk about it at our next meeting, and probably the follow-up meeting after that, if we were just gonna kind of spitball ideas as a full committee too, so.
Yeah, and so I'll even speak to it as a board, because as we said, we've outlined a variety of goals, some of which are simply monitor, but some are come forth with, a proposal or a dashboard is in one case. And so we are at the board level going to just be assigning that, you have either a group of 1 or 2 to come up with a draft and recommendation, bring it to committee, and then have people opine on. So I would think a similar process would be helpful here.
Okay. Because with a March deadline for us to kind of have our recommendations, so that you got a couple months for you to have something up and running in May, it seems like a pretty tight window.
Sounds like a retreat to me.
Yeah, that's great. I think these all sound like admirable goals. I'll be curious to see the other pieces that don't relate to CFC also, but I think it's exciting to support the financial side of this with the dashboard work, the funding piece as well. I think that's what we're here for. Should be good. Anyone have any questions for Greg or Tom?
So I think as an action, we can commit that when they're kind of on this Thursday, next Thursday, once they're done, we can send them to the committee so they can see the whole package of what it is, and those that have expectations of CFC involvement will be so named. So.
I don't have the dates that we set for our upcoming meetings at part of the. We have a December one. So I think once it's official and before that, we could do some planning on how we want to start working through it. Great. Next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report. Tony, you can take the lead on that.
Sure, I will kick it off, and then Brian, I will pass it over to you to kind of talk through what the work that's been done on it. This comes from the conversation at the last CFC meeting, looking at the not complete picture that the weighted average information was providing, given that the district had a good amount of money allocated into high interest earning liquid accounts that weren't being formulated in. We also had talked about this one piece of data not being reflective to the district's laddering investment strategy. And there's years when the market's low that we outperform, and then because we're not always chasing the current year's rate, we're keeping a more consistent long-term approach to it. There's been a good amount of work done in looking at how can we report this, what can be calculated. PMA was involved in discussions as well, And Brian, I will kick it over to you to kind of take us from here.
Okay, thanks, Tony. So yeah, just to kind of pick up where Tony left off, the challenge that we kind of had initially was coming up with an acceptable benchmark to use to kind of measure our investment portfolio against. And there isn't really an index out there like you might use for your 401k or personal finances or something of that nature that is applicable to public school districts. So, as we were kind of brainstorming around this topic, there were really three factors that played a large part in our decision. The first has to do with our investment policy. And PMA touched on this a bit in the last meeting, but school districts are confined by state statute to investments that are of more of a safer nature, things such as U.S. treasuries, agencies, certificates of deposit, stuff like that. So the policy is also indicating that safety of principal and liquidity are higher priorities than the actual rate of return. So that's why you'll almost always see the district buying and holding its investments until maturity, rather than kind of getting into this game of actively swapping investments midterm in an attempt to play the interest rate market. So that's kind of the policy's overall impact on this process. Then the second factor has to do with the average maturity of investments in the district's portfolio. That average can vary quite a bit depending on where we're at in the year and how the property tax collection cycle is falling, as well as the amount of reserves that the district has on hand. But if we kind of look at it on an average basis, the investments in our portfolio typically get held about 1 to 2 years before they reach maturity. So that was another kind of piece in terms of identifying a proper benchmark. Then the third factor is the concept of the recognition of interest earnings. Because of that buy and hold strategy and the types of investments we hold, interest is frequently not received until an investment actually matures, or you could possibly have a semi-annual coupon payment if we're holding, a treasury or some type of government agency investment. Since the district uses a cash basis of accounting, we only recognize interest when that cash is actually received. So that means there are some months where we can see a large amount of interest earnings and others where there's very little or even almost none, depending on what kind of rate we're getting in our money market account. So a month by month rate of return calculation would not be very meaningful when it comes to looking at a school district's investment performance. So kind of taking all three of those factors into account, we came up with a benchmark proposal that is based on the rate of a 1-year US Treasury bill. And then we developed a visual for measuring the district's actual performance in comparison. So there's a sample of the chart shown on page 17 of the meeting packet tonight. And actually, I'll go ahead and share my screen here just so anyone who's watching the recording later or anything can see what I'm talking about. So here's an example of the chart that I mentioned. The red line on the chart is the district's rate of return on investments. So that's shown on a rolling 1-year average, basically for the purpose of eliminating some of those month by month fluctuations in interest income that I was talking about. Then that line can be compared to the black line, which is the rate the district could have obtained if it had invested in a 1-year US Treasury 12 months ago. So I think the effectiveness of this visual is not just the story it tells of our portfolio's performance, but it also kind of gets to the overall goals of our investment policy. You'll notice that there tends to be a lag in the portfolio's performance compared to market interest rates. And that kind of gets to what Tony was saying in the introduction is, this buy and hold investment with the buy and hold investment approach, as interest rates are falling, the district is still holding investments with higher rates, and our portfolio tends to outperform the market. But when interest rates start rising, it takes time for the portfolio to catch up for exactly the same reason. So that performance is fairly consistent with the concept of maintaining a low risk investment portfolio. And in other words, even as interest rates are experiencing these sudden shifts, we want to be able to produce a reliable and steady stream of income for budgeting and financial planning purposes. So we're attempting to kind of smooth out the line as much as we can to kind of help us know what kind of money we're going to have coming in from holding these investments. So, tonight we're really just looking for feedback from the committee on two things. The first being the overall benchmarking approach. And then number two, whether the chart and a brief narrative kind of describing the district's investment strategy and its performance expectation would be a useful addition to the monthly treasurer's report in place of that weighted average to maturity data that we've shown in the past.
Thanks, Brian. Questions or comments?
Yes. Is it possible, first of all, I appreciate everything you do. Secondly, is it possible for us to be more proactive with our money managers and brokers to let us know at some point? I mean, I bond rates were like 9% a couple of years ago, and now they're 4.5% or something, and the new bonds coming out at the end of the month, they're 10.75 because inflation's back up again. Is it possible for them to say, hey, you know what, you got these securities, let's just get out of them and get into some new ones because, rates are fluctuating so much, and our idea is to buy and hold. We've got securities on this page. I mean, granted, that was the rate, and they're under 1% from 2 years ago. And, rates have kind of skyrocketed since then. At some point, even though we are very conservative, and like you said, we don't like to play the swap market, at some point in time, shouldn't the people that represent us say, hey, you know what, you need to get out of this and get into some 5% and, go from there and hold those?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's one that's come up before. I had a similar one for one of our investment advisors a few months ago too, and the response was that most of these investments that we've got, the market value on the investments is so low that if we were to have sold them early, we would have taken an extreme loss at the time, and the rate that we could have gotten on a new investment would not have been enough to make up the difference of that loss, or if it did, it was going to be very minimal. So they actually came back and showed me that they, on a monthly basis, or maybe it was every 2 months, I can't remember the frequency, it was either every month or 2 months, they run a swap analysis on our portfolio to see if there are any opportunities out there that make sense from a financial standpoint for us to do exactly what you're saying. And over the course of the last year or whatever, because those market values are so low on our investments, it just didn't make sense to take action on those.
Okay, I understand completely, but I just want to make sure the question's out there, that how can we capitalize on it? Because there's really no other way for us to make money besides tax revenues, and with rates being higher, we definitely want to be in the market because we've got millions of dollars. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I would just add that a sign of a good graphic is when the people who are looking at it go immediately to the content and on the details of the graphic. So to your question of, is this a good system and a helpful graphic? I think it is, as illustrated by Cal, your question really being about the content of the information as opposed to the presentation, so I think it was great. And it's really legible. I always prefer more time than less, so maybe, can you talk about why you chose the 2-year period instead of a longer period?
You mean the 1 year for the benchmark?
No, I mean the date range of the graphic, so it runs from July 21 to July 23. July 31st, 2021 to July 31st, 2023, so I guess I'm just wondering why 2 years and not 3 years or 5 years or 10 years?
Gotcha. Yeah, some of it was on availability of information that I was pulling from in terms of those rates for the treasury. So the source I was using only went back so far, so that was part of it. But my plan was, as we start building up more data points, then rather than confining it to just the 2 years, we'd kind of keep it rolling to give us a larger scale picture.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I'm always more history is better than less, and I would agree that I think this graphic does a great job of illustrating the benefits of the laddering, philosophy that we have, and shows that while your current average is lagging the current market, at the time when the current market was at nothing, you were still earning dollars because of your strategy, over the longer haul. So I think it's great. I do have a little bit of a concern about the 1 year treasury as the benchmark. Right now it makes sense given the size of the fund balances and your investment of your ability to invest out longer term. But when we look out 5 years, what the projections look like, and when you've got a fund balance percentage in the 30% range, you're not going to be doing 1 year investments, and you might just be investing from spring tax time to fall tax time, and it might only be a 6-month horizon. So that's something we might want to think about as balances are lower and things evolve.
Yeah,
That's a good.
go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead, Tony.
Okay, that's something too that I've thought about is as we see our fund balance reduce, it may make sense then at that time for to bring this topic back to CFC and determine a more appropriate benchmark timeline. Right now, we if you look at some of the data from the July Treasurer's report, we're seeing some of these low interest earning investments rolling off. We're able to then reinvest in today's rates, so we see that jump up in future months. But as we bring that down, we'll need, we may not need as many treasuries, and we'll be in, looking at 6 month and 9 months CD rates and things like that. So, as our fund balance starts to draw down throughout Project 2, then it would definitely make sense to bring this topic back and talk about a more appropriate benchmark.
I think that makes sense. I think it's great for now, and hopefully the board will see some value in the new approach.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the graphic. I appreciate Cal's question and hope that we're very, when you look at I'm looking at the chart on page 20, which is the individual data that you can go to. And, we've got, I hope that the question of, is being looked at on an individual investment at a time, because we've got investments that are 2 and 3 years out that are at 8.8, 0.7. And I don't know if that still is an unwise move to sell, then it's an unwise move versus kind of just a general swap. The other thing I want to point out is that on page 20, where it has the weighted average yield, that number again is a number that to me, where it is 1.09%, is the one that I had challenged in the past because it is only, I think, looking at the investments management. It doesn't count any of the on-demand, I think. So that number is meaningless to me. The 1.09%.
Right, you want to make sure that the number from the red line in the graph, which is that, as of July or August, whatever is between 1.5 and 2 that gets reflected. So we're in the data of the report too.
Correct, the interest is not on part of what we're investing, it's on our portfolio, so.
Any other questions or comments on these revisions, potential revisions to the treasury report? So is the next step then you'll just start sending revised reports to the board on a monthly basis? Get any feedback from them that they may have?
Yes, that's correct. We didn't want to have it presented at last CFC, make a change, then come here and make another change, so we've got everything consistent. And then based on tonight's conversation, then moving forward, we'll update our reporting and take it from there.
Great, thank you. I think it's a good step in the right direction.
Great, thank you all for the feedback.
Our next agenda item is ESSER report. I'm sure all of you read education news services as much as I do. But a topic that's been pretty common, probably at least for the last 6 months, is the so-called ESSER cliff and all the federal funding that came from the pandemic falling off and potential fiscal challenges that's going to create for governments to spend that money on recurring items rather than one-time items, since it's one-time revenue. And I know that the district has been maintaining sort of a status report on the ESSER funds as they're coming in and how they're being used online. And I saw that it had been updated through the end of the last fiscal year, and I thought it would be good for us to just have a quick report on that. I know we've got some questions from the community about this over the last year also. So who wants to take the lead on this one?
I can kick it off, and then again I'll pass over to Brian for additional look. But just to give a quick recap here, throughout the ESSER's grant process, 3 total grants, ESSER's 1, ESSER 2, and then the third ESSER's. OPRF was awarded a total combined between those 3 of just over $2 million. Right now we have spent 1.956 million of that. We have been reimbursed 1.913 million. And I think while I take 0 credit for this because I was not here to help make any of these decisions, as Stephen alluded to, it's a testament to the responsibility the district took with these ESSER's dollars. It is just a very hot button issue and causing panic in a lot of areas. Those districts that took that money out and solely put it into long-term staffing hires or programming, and now are chasing their tail to find millions of dollars of funding on an annual basis that will no longer be coming in from the federal government. Looking at our ESSER's 1 spending, you can see it was really broken up between the path to the private schools, communication efforts, preparation for hybrid learning, special education services, and technology for remote learning. And I think you would find a similar trend through ESSER's 1 in many districts, but in ESSER's 2 and 3, you see the nice split between temporary staffing and technology use. This is really the grant area. I think a lot of districts started to go into more permanent staffing instead of temporary staffing that are struggling to now make decisions in terms of what to keep and what to cut from a financial standpoint. As we look at then the ESSER's 3 category, again, very spread out between tutoring and recovery programs, support for students learning remotely, health services staff, technology, special education, intervention and transition, health safety protocols, and social distancing initiatives. What this is allowing the district to do now is, let me see, just got an email that took up half my screen, is to look and say, okay, as this money starts to sunset from the federal government, it really should not have a tremendous impact on our students' ability to keep learning and moving forward. There's not a financial cliff we are about to fall off of that some districts are facing. The money was put into areas that help the students transition and recover from the pandemic. And now we've gotten to that point, and now we're able to look and say, okay, what have we learned? And a deeper dive will need to be done in terms of what programming maybe we found beneficial. We want to keep seeing moving forward, but we have the ability to make those choices as the district instead of looking at pretty severe budget cuts that may have to come that other districts are facing. So, Brian, I don't know if you want to fill in any gaps I may have left, but
yeah, I mean, only two things I'll add is really the way we organized the ESSER fact sheet was intentionally in chronological order as to when the ESSER grants arrived. And the reason is that kind of tells a story in and of itself of the sense that it kind of mirrors how we progressed and changed and shifted things throughout the pandemic. So, the ESSER 1 grant became available in May 2020. So, if you think back to that time period, the district was, had this sudden, shutdown and shift to remote learning. So, our costs kind of got dedicated to, some of these extra needs that came up in terms of students and staff now needing to work from home, and what kind of resources did they need for that purpose. Then, as ESSER 2 arrived, we were starting to operate under this hybrid learning model. So more of the funding went to that temporary staffing that Tony mentioned, some additional technology items that kind of help facilitate this learning model of having teachers and students who are in separate locations. You might have a teacher who is in the building and a few students in the building, but others that are learning virtually, or sometimes even the case where the teacher is teaching from remotely, but you have students in the building. So we had these temporary staff people that could kind of supervise and monitor classrooms to kind of help keep the learning going, during these like odd times that the education industry was facing. And then finally, as ESSER 3 came along, it's all about this, how can we get back to the safe learning environment of in-person learning? What kind of health and safety protocols need to be in place? And then, eventually, as we kind of started getting accustomed to that, it's, the focus really shifts to the students, like, all right, what students, how can we identify students that have really been impacted by the pandemic, both from, an academic standpoint, as well as, social, emotional standpoint, and what resources can we give them to kind of help catch them back up, get reacclimated to, life after the pandemic and so forth. So, you can just kind of see that progression as the ESSER grants went along as to how the planning went into funding for this, because it's a large amount of money. While OPRF did not get nearly as much as other districts did, $2 million certainly helped with devoting some of those resources that we needed to kind of get through this overall challenge of the pandemic. And then lastly, I'll just say it isn't in the memo itself, but the other thing I wanted to add is with these being federal grant dollars, they do receive increased scrutiny during our annual audit. So every year when our auditors come in, they're looking at these ESSER grants in particular to make sure that the expenses we've reported are compliant, with the grant requirements, that we're following all other grant procedures, things of that nature. So that really adds an extra layer of oversight and accountability regarding these funds.
Thank you. Any questions on the ESSER report?
I have two quick ones. One is in the ESSER 1, the pass-through funds to private schools, what was that specifically? And was it a continuing thing? Is this our 2 week thing?
Brian, do you want to speak to that? There's part of this grant that was required.
Yeah.
Yes, that was so the ESSER grants are kind of set up along the same model of the title grants. And in the title grants, we're required to set aside a portion of that money to serve private school students. So when they created ESSER 1, they set it up exactly the same to where, we had to set aside almost 50% of that grant actually for private school students or private schools within our boundaries to utilize for some of the same purposes as we did. Then when we got to ESSERs 2 and 3, that restriction was eliminated because the state ended up allocating a portion of that money specifically for private schools, so then it didn't flow through public schools anymore.
Right. Brian, could you clarify that it was set up like Title I, not Title II? So it was schools within our geographic boundaries. It was not students who live within our geographic boundaries who attend private schools anywhere else. It was the former.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. So it's schools. So Fenwick and Trinity were the recipients of those dollars.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a much smaller total dollar piece. The pie looks big, but it's a smaller pie. My second question really is dovetail into what you said, which is, where do we go from here? So what to me would be helpful is if we look at the chart that has the ESSER 3 spend, it would be nice to know what's next. So as you look at this, even on a line by line basis, what, as an example, tutoring credit recovery programs, are we saying that we are, closing that down and we're done spending, or the district will then need to make a determination for the future? It would be nice to kind of connect this to what the future is. I applaud the work done where it wasn't that we hired a bunch of full time, but still as a board to know that based on our investment, what kind of cliff is there that we have set us?
Yeah, that was my one comment too. Just wanting to know, as you evaluate the programs that you created from this, are there some that you determined you do want to keep, and is there a budgetary impact of that? The only other comment I had, I think communicating financial information to the community is a piece of our charge, and I do think this is really helpful information. So it may be something, I know it's on the website, but it may be something that in a newsletter or something that goes out that either do a quick summary of it or point people to it just to let them know it's available.
Yeah, we can do that. We can talk about it. We reference this and direct folks to it in upcoming quarterly newsletters that we're now sending out, or maybe in Husky Mail. We can talk about different aspects of that. Great, thanks.
Anything else on the ESSER? Then our final agenda item is the levy.
Brian, do you want to share your screen and you can drive the presentation, and then
Go.
as we talk to our tax levy, we are now in the period of time where we're starting to get some information from our local assessors in terms of home values and kicking off this levy process. And what we've done is put together a presentation similar to what may be shown to the board. And what we're looking for here is either a affirmation or a modification to the recommendation we look to be taking to the board. So just to run through our timeline really quick, tonight we're going to have our initial discussion and development of a recommendation. At the November 2nd Committee of the Whole, we'll present the estimated levy. November 16th, the board would adopt the estimated levy. December 13th, the notice of truth and taxation and public hearing will be published in the local newspaper. December 21st, the board meeting, the truth and taxation hearing will happen, the final levy will be adopted, and the deadline to file the levy is December 26th on a Tuesday. I can tell you we'll be filing the Friday before this, given Christmas and running into holiday difficulties. So going to the next slide here, just some quick property tax definitions, because this is a very complex process to help everybody understand. Our property taxes are levied by taxing bodies and are based on the equalized assessed value, which we'll refer to as EAV moving forward. That's the total local tax rate that is applied to the value of a home. The levy is the amount of money we are requesting or asking for. The extension is the amount of taxes that are billed and then provided to the taxing body, the district. Our EAV is our taxable value placed on property by the local assessor and then adjusted by county to bring the overall property assessment to 1/3 of a fair market value. And the tax rate is that the total extension divided by the total EAV. We are limited to the property tax extension limitation law. PTEL was enacted in Cook County in 1994, and it controls the growth of property taxes locally to schools. The district is allowed to ask for as a maximum is the lesser of CPI at the prior year or 5% prior to taking into account new property. And then we are provided a limiting rate formula, which is included here. And as you see going forward, up until the last couple of years, this has never been a major issue as CPI was not creeping into the exceeding 5% range. Most years it was hovering, 1 to 2%. But the last couple of years with the inflation that we're experiencing, this is where this law has taken effect. And if CPI comes in at 7%, the maximum the district would be able to ask for would be a 5%. Let me clarify, the maximum we'd be eligible to receive. We could ask for a little bit more, but we don't be eligible to receive 5%. And then just a quick look at the history of CPI. You can see 2011 it was 3%. That was the highest it had been until 2021 when we saw 7%. This year, actual CPI would be 6.5%. So we'd then be looking at a maximum increase of 5%.
So while CPI is a known variable in the levy formula, new property and EAV have to be estimated each year because those values are not finalized by the county until after the levy gets adopted. So one factor that comes into play with these estimates is that properties in Cook County are subject to reassessment every 3 years. And 2023 is a reassessment year for both Oak Park and River Forest Townships. So if we look at the history for new property, 2019 jumps out immediately because 2 Village of Oak Park TIFs expired and became taxable property for the district that year. But outside of that, we typically see spikes during those triannual assessment years. So for the 2023 levy, we've developed an initial estimate of 25 million for new property after kind of taking a look at what type of new property we've had in the last few years, and then conversations and information that has come out from the assessor's offices. If we look at EAV history, it shows a similar trend for the reassessment years. The township assessors have reported that on average, 2023 assessed values in Oak Park have increased 38%, and River Forest is at 32%. Now those values are likely to come down some after appeals are processed and the county does its review. But we are estimating an EAV increase currently of 26% for this levy year. Point too far. There we go. Then the other piece of history that's critical to the district's overall story involving the tax levy is what I've referred to on this slide as levy control initiatives. If you look at the chart, the black line that you see represents the trajectory of the district's tax extension if it had asked for the maximum allowable amount under PTEL every year. Now, for many school districts, the levy is merely a formality of requesting that maximum amount every single year. However, if you look at the blue line, then that shows OPRF's actual extensions. And you'll notice that several different levy decisions have been made since 2013 in an attempt to address the fund balance that the district had been building up over time. These decisions included things like operating levy reductions, various abatements, and levying less than the full CPI in certain years. So if we were to accumulate all of these initiatives, the district has essentially declined $67 million of tax revenue that it could have requested within the tax cap. So for the 2023 levy, we wanted to present the committee with a couple baseline scenarios just to show how this year's levy decisions impact the future finances of the district. So scenario 1 on this slide utilizes the assumptions that we have built into our 5-year projection. So those include a 3.5% CPI, a levy as if CPI were 3.5% plus new property in 2023. In subsequent years, then, it's assumed that CPI is 2.5% and the district levies in full. Now, the green bar towards the bottom of this slide will look very familiar to you all based on the financial projections we've reviewed over the last 6 months or so. It shows fund balance as a percentage of operating expenditures is projected to be within our targeted fund balance range, so the 25 to 50% range that we've set over the last 3 years of our projection. And the final 2 years would be the low points at the 36 and 37%. Levy scenario 2 takes all of the same assumptions from scenario 1, except it includes a maximum levy in 2023. So in this scenario, there's an additional $5.6 million of revenue that gets generated over the span of the years shown in this projection. You'll see that fund balance still remains within the targeted range during the last 3 years, but in this case, it doesn't fall below 40% of operating expenditures in any year. So then we have a little bit of what if analysis that kind of helps clarify what other scenarios might look like. The first bullet point here says that, for each 0.1% of CPI that we levy for in 2023, fund balance would then be about $350,000 higher by the end of fiscal year 28, which is the last year in the financial projection. Then the second data point refers to that operating fund balance to expenditure ratio that was in the green bar on the previous slides. So if we wanted to use our levy to increase that percentage 1% by the end of the projection, we would need almost $1 million of additional revenue during that time frame. So the $977,000 that you see here. If we were to tie these 2 points together with an example, if we wanted fund balance to then be 1% higher than what we were showing in scenario 1, we could levy 3.8% for CPI instead of 3.5%, because the difference of that 0.3% of CPI equals just over $1 million. So a lot of numbers here, but it kind of gets at some of the math behind the impact of the levy, in case you were curious about other scenarios that may not have fallen into the 2 that we showed. because the tax extension is so vital to the district's long-term health, there are several other items that we have to consider before making a levy recommendation. The biggest one right now is Cook County's delay in billing and distributing property taxes. So 2 years in a row now, we've had to wait until November or December for taxes to arrive. That means that 5 months of our fiscal year have passed before we receive our largest source of revenue. If we kind of put this into perspective, the district on average spends about 30% of its operating expense budget in the first 5 months of the fiscal year. So if you recall from our financial projections, fund balance is expected to reach a low point of 36% in the later years of that scenario 1 projection. So that doesn't leave much leeway if the county continues with some of these substantial delays in the future. So a very big consideration in terms of kind of cash flow management and fund balance management. Some other items to consider, we've seen some recent cost escalations in transportation and health insurance that have exceeded the assumptions in our financial projections. If those increases were to continue, we would either have to look at finding reductions in other expense areas or consider increasing the levy. Second is the topic of capital project work. We got into this a little bit, I think, with the discussion of the goals, but while we have a general financing plan in place for project 2, there are also some of these other projects on the horizon that will require funding. One source of funding is obviously the tax levy, but there is always uncertainty when estimating that future CPI number. Our financial projections assume it will be 2.5% in future years, but we know from past experience that it won't always be that high. So the district kind of has to weigh the options of potentially levying more now in order to access the higher CPI and then save for future needs, or utilizing debt when the time comes to embark on some of these other projects. One alternative option that recently became available is some new legislation that went into effect in 2022. The basic premise of this law is that if a district chooses to levy less than the maximum permitted levy in a particular year and files a certification with the county clerk stating it did so, the district can opt to recapture that difference in the future. Now, there are 4 kind of important points here regarding this law. The first one being that upon filing the certification, the district has 3 years to elect to recapture. Secondly, filing the certification does not require the district to recapture. It merely gives the option to do so. Number 3, the recaptured amount cannot result in the district exceeding the 5% PTEL limit in any given year. So, let's say, for example, there were 3 straight years in the future where CPI was 5% or higher. No school district would be able to recapture any under levies from previous years during those 3 years because it would take them over the 5% PTEL limit. Then fourthly, the district must have one of the 2 highest financial designations from ISB at the time of recapture. So this comes from the financial profile score on the annual financial report. Currently, the district is sitting in the highest financial designation. So currently, we don't have anything to worry about from that standpoint. So let's look at a quick hypothetical example. We know that CPI for this year's levy is over 5%, but the limit for PTEL is 5%. So let's assume OPRF decides to levy as if CPI was 3.5% and then files the required certification with the county. If we then assume that CPI for the 2024 levy comes in at 4%, We could then look, review our financial standing next year, and we might opt not to recapture anything from the prior levy because the 4% exceeds the 2.5% levy assumption in our financial projection, and we feel that the existing levy is able to meet our needs. Then 2025 rolls around, and let's assume the CPI comes in at 1%. Then, we might be looking at that 2.5% financial projection assumption and thinking, gosh, we were really counting on having that revenue for whatever the reason may be. In that case, we could then elect to recapture the difference that was under levied in 2023 and therefore increase our 2025 levy by more than 1%. So you can see kind of how the spirit of this law is working, in that it's an attempt to change the mentality for PTEL districts that if they don't levy the maximum, they're automatically forfeiting that money forever, because they do have this recapture option available to them, provided they meet the various criteria that we talked about on the earlier slide.
Okay, so now when we look at the different scenarios, in looking at our financial picture moving forward, it's our recommendation, the following for the 2023 levy year is to levy at the 3.5% increase for CPI plus new property, and not take the maximum 5%. The county allows the district to include what's called loss of cost increase, and that's where they will provide basically a 3% cushion to account for taxes that are not paid during that year. Historically, we have foregone those, and we will continue to do so. We'd like to file the certification with the county that we are levying less than the maximum to allow for a possibility of a recapture in future years. Not a guarantee of a recapture, but if CPI was to come in dramatically lower than our financial projections, we would be able to smooth out that effect and keep our projections tighter. And then another newer law that has come in is there's a prior year refunds and appeals exemption that comes through, and it's not a new levy, but what it is it's accounts for mistakes and assessment errors that happened during an appeal or an assessment process. Last year that was approximately $800,000. We would recommend accepting that this year and then earmarking those dollars specifically for capital projects moving forward. Looking at our recommendation moving forward, it stays pretty tight between the two different scenarios that you just saw. But what it does is it gives the district a little bit of a cushion if we continue to see Cook County taxes delayed in the future. The goal here, and as we said, is we've been in a good financial position right now. So when we have that delay in the property tax extension, we're able to cover our own bills until we get that revenue to come in. But once we draw down that fund balance throughout the project too, we don't want to see the district be in a position that we're either falling below our fund balance policy, below the 25% at a given time due to a delay in the property taxes, or having to issue short-term borrowing in like a tax anticipation mortgage as many districts do to get back to that threshold. You can see here, it still achieves our goal of falling between 25 and 50% of our operating funds. And now we'd like to open it up to the CFC for questions or comments.
Thanks, Tony and Brian. I got one that I just noticed. If you could go back 2 slides to the projection summary. How is this different than the one that was in our packet? In the packet, the 3.5 scenario has a 37% fund balance percentage out in that last year. It looks like the difference is in revenues, but Do you know what the,
Is
is it the
Yes,
recapture levy?
So that was not in what we have reviewed as in the packet.
correct. In prior years, because it's like last year, the district did not accept those dollars when they came in. So this is what the projection would look like with those dollars in it. Brian, is there anything else in here that I'm missing beyond just the recapture?
No, just the recapture, it does make the assumption that average we've seen of $800,000 the last couple of years remained the same in future years going forward, and we continued to accept that levy and apply it towards the capital projects, as Tony noted.
If it's going to the capital projects, why is it changing the operating fund percentage?
It's prior to showing any transfers of those dollars, so they're earmarked for capital projects, but they're still sitting in operating funds in this version of the projection.
Yeah, thank you.
And what's the rationale for previously not accepting those dollars, but going forward accepting them?
In terms of previously not accepting the dollars, I had to turn the question back to the committee, just as done prior to my arrival. The rationale for accepting it and earmarking it was to, because we are paying such a large portion, not just of this project, but potentially of a future project. Going forward, we can commit to putting those dollars, when you receive the 800,000 we're talking about, one thing that has been made, I don't want to say unclear, but just the district has a little bit more control than its general tax levy, as they can choose where they allocate those dollars. So for us, instead of putting that back and driving the fund balance back up, we can earmark it into the capital projects to make sure that we're continuously having a revenue source that comes in to offset some of these costs, whether it's in project 2 or in future years. That could just be in the general upkeep and maintenance of our 10-year facilities plan. So we're not being irresponsible and just collecting money, but we're actually intending to use it for a certain purpose.
I like that as a philosophy. I would want to change how you're showing it in this and have it reflected in the capital funds instead of the operating funds.
Sure.
That makes sense. And the one thing that I'm not sure has been, totally clear with that levy in the past is, well, we kind of touched on it. It's not a new levy. It's essentially dollars that the district had already asked for in the previous year, but didn't get because of these errors or adjustments that were made after the fact. So, when our extension gets completed by the county, we never receive 100% of the extension because of delinquent payments, missed payments, refunds, things of that nature. So oftentimes we end up collecting, roughly 98.5%, 99% of that extension. This levy kind of shrinks that gap for us. So, it gets us a little bit closer to the 100% of the levy that we actually asked for in the previous year.
My other reason for wanting to take it out of the operating projections is I think I still have some uncertainty on sort of what the baseline of that is going to be. This is my experience of our district. We've seen some wild fluctuations in the first couple of years of it. So I hate to put in nearly $1 million for each of the next 5 years and be counting on it for the operating budget, but as kind of a extra set aside for capital, while we get a little more history on where that's going to level out, I'm a little more comfortable with that. Other questions or comments?
Sure. If we're filing on recapture, why not 3%? Just a question, don't have to answer it now. I think you can't really levy a full 5% when you have positive cash flow every year. He said 6.7 million. I've heard that at this table before over the years, 60, 70 million, if we would have max levy. But you also have to take into consideration how many people would just leave their house empty and pay them. That's what happens in Maywood. I'm from Maywood. They're max levying 5% every year, there's not empty houses there, so that's gonna decrease your tax revenue in the long run. We can do some type of collation on that, that would be good. Also, let's see. Oh, this is why we keep asking about this 1.09%. Because we got $80 million in the bank. We should be maxing that out so that we don't have these problems. I mean, it's not really problems, but you guys are kind of telling us the doomsday scenario too. But if we had more than this 1.09%, when the I-bond's paying 4.3 right now, and God knows how much interest rates are and everything like that, we should be in that. That's why, I'm gonna say it again, we should be more proactive with people who are managing our money to maximize our conservative investments, or else we have to find someone else. I understand we've probably been with these people for years, everybody's comfortable, but I mean, if we have a lot of 100 million, 1%, that's $1 million. 2%, that's the Escher fund. So
I think we also have to acknowledge that a big part of the reason that earnings aren't as high as they could be is also because Cook County can't get their work done on time, and we should already have, what is it, $35 million of money that's going to come in next month. It should have came in August and could have been invested at 5%.
that's not going away anytime soon. Because nobody can afford their houses in some other communities, and it's kind of affecting everybody.
And just one point of clarification, just to help with it, because I agree that 1.09%, what we look to be, it's an interesting balance that we work with our investment advisors often on, and I didn't go back to a previous topic for too long, but we do have 33% of that total investable dollars is sitting at over 5% interest rates right now. Yeah. So we and then that was as of July 31st. But then as we reinvest, we're getting better interest rates now. So I just wanted to point out that we don't have all of our money sitting at one.
And all this before you were here.
Yeah. Well, but I would not knock this approach, because this laddered investment approach is one that you would see most districts in a healthy financial position that are able to go out longer term use this laddered approach. We're just in a market now that you generally don't see the 5% interest earnings, and we have to take advantage of them while we can. And I fully agree with that.
But there is a quandary.
Yes,
We got some stuff earning 0.5. We got rates at 5.5. At some point in time, there's got to be some type of break-even point. If it's 6, you got to say, okay, sell those and buy these.
yes,
It's got to be a point at some point where somebody's going to pull the trigger. So we're in the better of the thing. And if rates go up, okay, we're still in at 6%, not 0.8. If rates go down, we're in at 6%, not 0.8.
Yep.
So there's got to be some type of a level. That's what I'm saying. Just call these people up and say, look, we need to figure something out here, because we got some really bad securities on the books right now, just because of the way the world's gone. At what point in time are we getting out of these? What do interest rates have to go to for us to get out of these? And I can take this to the board and it'll be like an extra 2% on 80 million or 40 million. Okay, fine.
fully agree. I hope I'm not coming across combative, because I'm
Oh, no,
completely on the
that's
same
fine.
page. Yeah.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
And I like the way you asked that question, because it isn't just, what's the right delta that makes it attractive, going back to that, so thank you. I had 3 things to talk to. Thank you for the information, this has been in my mind,
Yes.
It's laid out, it prompts more questions. First, I did look at this and, you kind of talked to it, but I wanna emphasize it. We've seen some cost increases that I consider to be not insignificant since we made presented and made longer term financial decisions, to the tune of $1 million to $1.5 million incremental dollars of operating expense per year. So it's not chump change. It's that you mentioned it, you said healthcare, you said transportation, but it's it's $1 million to $1.5 million a year, and so I'm not, you know, I don't know what we need to do about that. I mean, we need to control it, but how do we factor that? What's gonna happen to that over the longer term? And how does that change our decisions? Because that's different data than we had when we were making earlier decisions. And so in my mind, that's, you know, that's a change in course, not dramatically, but it's a change in course. So, but it's $1.5 million a year when you're at a 2027. That we're spending that much more. And we, you know, the whole plea was we need a balanced budget, right? To kind of sustain where we're going. And that's $1.5 million off that we need to figure out. The second question I have, or a question I have for Brian is, so just, I want to make sure I'm clear. The look back information that was presented today is new or is different than the look back provisions that existed that drove earlier decision making, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I mean, I don't want, in 2013, 2014, those big dips in revenue, at that point, the rule was you could take advantage of that look back, which means you could increase, you know, at a later time, only if your taxation level was lower than the previous year. In this case, it's only if you take less than the max. That's, I just want to make sure I understand that change. Is that right? Is that it?
Yes, you understand that correctly.
So that's, I mean,
Yeah, definitely very different.
That's
the old FAC.
yes,
talks about when they
that's
were
a much,
under.
you know, that certainly fits into, and it's effective as of when, well, you have to file, right? So we haven't filed anything in prior years related to this.
Correct, we, since this has gone into effect in 2022, it was not filed last year.
Okay.
So this would be a new recommendation.
Yeah, because last year we took less than the max, but we didn't file. Could we have filed?
We could
Was
have.
it in place at that time?
Yes.
We don't talk about it though.
We didn't talk about it. So this is
We didn't file it, yeah.
This is the first I've heard of that revision, so that certain, and I appreciate the recommendation on that. My third point is
Quick, just on that point, one of the reasons why it wasn't really a topic of conversation last year was we knew we had 2 consecutive years of CPI being over 5%, which really would have only allowed, year number 3 where a recapture could have even been possible. And, the thought process was, would CPI really fall enough in 1 year, from over 5% to whatever the new value is to make a recapture, even worth discussing.
but I mean, as a practice, what's the downside to filing every time you do not take the max?
Oh yeah, there's no downside whatsoever.
So
We're not,
I mean,
we're not obligated.
it should be a standard practice that we put in place that says it just protects us. It gives us a little more forward flexibility. I mean, we're trying to manage it, but if there's no downside, why not do it? My third topic is the recapture 800 versus just straight up levy, which is a kind of a different way to what Cal was saying about 3%. So I would like to understand what the difference is between what is being presented as 3.5% plus an 800,000 recapture and a blank increase, because it's just whatever that equivalent value would be in a straight up levy What's that number? And what's the difference both to our taxpayers and to our district?
We can calculate that. The one thing though to understand on that, the 800,000 that we were talking about, that is not a new or an additional levy. So that is not something that the taxpayers would incur or feel. That is a correction of errors and mistakes that were made in the assessment and evaluation process by the local assessor. So it had also a relatively new law.
Where does the money come?
Yeah, where's it come from?
No, it becomes part of your total tax rate and would get applied to everybody else. But
Yeah, okay.
but the interesting part, so if you had an equivalent percentage increase that resulted in a total that was the same as the 3.5% plus the 800,000. It's the same impact on the taxpayer, but where it's gonna be different is in future years, the 800,000 is outside the tax cap.
Yes.
It's a separate amount that changes every year, but doesn't compound, whereas if we put more into the levy, it didn't take the 800,000, you'd have a higher base for the future years. CPI increase under the tax cap.
So the 1.5, 1.5, 1.5 compound, if we had 3.5 to 3 years, went back and took it up to 5 each year, right? That will compound.
Yeah, but we're talking about the other recapture piece. That's why it gets complicated. There are really two things that are called sort of recapture levy now. I think the approach that the administration is recommending, I think gives the district more flexibility going forward. It keeps less out of the tax cap. It allows you to decide on a year-to-year basis. Actually, it doesn't. I guess you just levy less again in the following year if you decide you want to offset what you had in the previous year, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to, to see this thing from both lenses, right? And it's over multi years, right? Recognizing options of what it could mean, because we were looking. That I'm not fully clear. My belief is that for the first year, you're charging, I mean, you're a taxpayer's paying the same amount of money. That 800,000 isn't coming out of the walls.
Right. Let me try to state, yeah. It's really just an added wrinkle that if you're trying to get as much as you can, this new recapture piece is new money, extra money coming in. But if every year you're taking this approach of we're gonna ask for what we think we need and it's not gonna be the maximum, it's just an extra complication where there's two different buckets that you're gonna combine to whatever amount where you wanna end up. It doesn't really matter which is in which one, again, unless at some point in time you're trying to max it all out.
So the 800,000 isn't money that was paid, errors were made, they were corrected, and now there's some money that is available for us to collect.
No, it's really, as Tony was saying, you never collected the 100% in the past, and so now you have an opportunity to recoup that in the following year for all those adjustments made, but it's spread over the whole tax base. So at some point in time, refunds were given to certain taxpayers that got adjusted values down. That comes straight out of the district's collections, and that's to something less than 100%. Now you get to recoup that, and it's not as impactful on a primarily residential community here as it is to districts that have really big commercial or industrial tax bases where those refunds can be hugely impactful, their collection rates can go really low, and now they're seeing this potential windfall that gets spread amongst everybody, and they're having a different conversation on should we take it.
Chicago drove this, right? Because of that.
To be honest, I don't know what the impetus was.
I actually Huntley drove it because this is the Mark Altmeyer bill.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Other questions or comments? I guess we need to let the administration know if we give a thumbs up to their recommendation of 3.5% plus the estimated recapture. 800,000, or we would recommend something different. I like this process of having this conversation each year, and not just defaulting to we're gonna levy to the max. And I feel like this was kind of what was in our plan for this year, so I'm comfortable with it, with the caveat that, I do want to revisit some of Tom's points on the expenditure side. We had planned to do a deeper dive into the projection models at our next meeting. I had some conversations earlier this week about reviewing assumptions. We spent a lot of time looking at projections, but not a lot of time really talking about the assumptions behind them. It was more about the debt piece, the project 2 funding, and less about all the rest. And I really think it's important for us to be evaluating that at least on an annual basis, if not more frequently. So with that caveat, though, I think I like this approach for the levy presentation to go to the board for their first blush. A couple weeks.
And for the future, I think we should also have that difference available to us in a, I don't know, estimate or something of like the 1.5% if we go back. Because that could come into a funding situation if we need to get some money in 2 or 3 years. Okay, if we go 1.5 years, is that cheaper for the taxpayer and for everything else? Would we want to pay interest on something or something like that?
Yeah, it would be good. It would be good to be
recap.
calculating how much is potentially available in which years as a footnote or whatever. Something else that we had talked about. Is I really liked what you had, Brian, in your slide about the sensitivity analysis on CPI and the fund balance percentage and the like. When we reviewed all the key assumptions, I think it'd be helpful to have that across all the areas of CPI and salary percentages and health insurance and transportation and everything else. So, 1% either way translates to how many dollars in 1 year and over 5 years.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the levy recommendation?
Makes sense to me.
Want to vote on it, or we just all agree?
We need a vote.
Okay.
I would, I'm on the receiving end, so I'm not voting or voicing I would like to understand, as I've stated, which is based on Brian's kind of sensitivity analysis. I believe $800,000 is what is it, 0.25 to 0.3%. Is that right? It's $300,000. $300,000 a point. So I'm going to say 0.3, and it's on the south side of that. So that would, is I think I'm hearing, a 3.8% levy, no recoup, would be close to the same dollar value as a 3.5% levy with the 800,000 recoup. Is that correct? In terms of just district revenue for that first year.
Right. And similarly, same tax rate, same impact to the taxpayer.
And the same to the taxpayer. So then what does that mean? Why one versus the other? What does it mean to both the district and the taxpayers? That's what, does it mean that we have more, opportunity to recoup, that whatever it means? I don't, this is a lot to take in. And that's what would be helpful to.
I did just come up with a thought. The one piece where it does make a difference, and Tony mentioned this in the presentation too, that recaptured levy has less strings attached to it, and so it's unrestricted. You can put it where you want, like let's say designated for capital. Whereas under the tax cap piece, you gotta say this is going to go to the education fund, this is going to go to the O&M fund, or whatever.
That's all part of what I'm looking for. What are the pros and what are the advantages? Down the road, because there are clearly differences.
Any other levy comments or questions? Thank you. future agenda items, so our next meeting is December 12th, that'll be before final levy hearing and adoption, so. We can revisit the conversations that the board has, look at whatever new materials you put together for them, to some of Tom's questions. And then I think, deep dive into the financial projections, reviewing assumptions. Hearing more about some of the expenditure items that have gone a little differently than expected, would be good for that meeting. Also, the other item that we kind of had sort of on the radar for the December or January meeting was looking at evidence-based funding and staffing. I feel like we may be biting off more than we could chew. We had that conversation then. So then that would push to the March meeting, but we also have to work on our goal charge of a dashboard along the way too. So we'll kind of wait to hear from the board on the finalization of the goals, but then we'll start thinking about what the both the December and March meetings look like, and maybe we'll look for volunteers for a dashboard subcommittee of some sort. Or we can just have Greg Kohler work on it since he missed. Today, we'll volunteer him. Yeah.
Well, Greg says, let's bring it on.
Great committee.
And I would say, just based on the timing of December the 12th being our next meeting. So the board is gonna take this input, the administration's recommendation on the levy. There might be a kind of recycle back for further information, et cetera, on that. But I appreciate the input of those here in what's been presented.
Anything else for the cap?
So does that mean if needed, we would have like a Zoom meeting in between 12 or something, or?
No, I think
what you're talking about.
I would say that materials too, I mean, what this will do is if there's anything that might come out of the levy discussion, the chances to go to this committee for final, input prior to the board actually,
Okay.
voting on the levy. So there's another opportunity.
Okay.
If need be.
It could be a very brief conversation.
Yeah.
For us in December, depending on
Yeah.
board reaction and additional information. Okay, need a motion to adjourn?
Motion.